Most people imagine life on a tropical island as something magical. Clean sandy beaches, palm trees, warm ocean, beautiful women, and no worries whatsoever. Something along the lines of the famous Bounty ad. However, the realities of island life can be much more prosaic than one's most pessimistic ideas. The story of Pitcairn Island is the best proof of that. For over 2 centuries, the island had been witness to all the harsh realities of the difficult life on a 4.5 square kilometers piece of land lost in the Pacific Ocean. Pitcairn Island is the state with the smallest population in the world. With only 49 people living there, Pitcairn has a surprisingly fascinating story. It was founded by bounty mutineers who fled from English justice, after which the island was ruled by alcoholics and experienced a terrible genocide. Eventually, only one man was left alive. Later, this microstate was governed by a succession of crooks and lunatics, and in 2004, it became famous as the country with the highest percentage of pedophiles and ex-cons in the world. Just some 50 residents, but so many events. Polynesians used to live there, but they died out, without the help of Europeans. Polynesians, most likely Tahitians, settled on Pitcairn back in the 11th century. They founded a settlement there, brought over domestic animals, and lived an overall good life. Pitcairn Island had reserves of quality stone and obsidian, so the first inhabitants of the island lived by trading with the people of Mangareva Island, located 500 kilometers away. They might have sworn allegiance to the king of Mangareva. The happy life of the Polynesians lasted 400 years, but then the reserves of obsidian ran out, and a civil war broke out on Mangareva. Without trade, Pitcairn Islanders languished and eventually died out altogether. When the first Europeans arrived, there were no Polynesians living on the island. The story of Pitcairn Island started with the mutiny on the Bounty. The island story is one of the rebellious sailors and their descendants. In 1787, Britain sent the Bounty out into the Pacific Ocean with the mission to find the breadfruit tree. The British had recently lost the American colonies, so they were panicking. They still had important colonies in the Caribbean, but a riot could break out there at any moment, all because of hunger. The local soil wasn't suitable for cultures that the Europeans were familiar with, so the British decided to plant a breadfruit tree in the West Indies. It was for this purpose that they sent the Bounty to the Pacific Islands. But the mission failed. Captain Bligh brought the ship to the shores of Tahiti, where life was too good to be true. The sailors were welcomed with open arms, and the local women turned out to be very loving. Thus, the crew of the ship lived there for over 6 months, and they were very reluctant to return to the sea. The mutiny followed shortly thereafter. On April 28, 1789, the sailors set Bligh and his supporters adrift on a fragile boat in the middle of the ocean, while they returned to Tahiti. A while later, it began to dawn on some of the sailors that retribution would inevitably follow their rebellion. They boarded the Bounty and sailed away, having decided to try and settle on the uninhabited Pitcairn Island. They were led by Fletcher Christian. Actually, it was the same man who initiated the mutiny against Bligh. The rest of the sailors remained on Tahiti and paid for it. The British eventually got them. Some of them were hanged, while others were sentenced to hard labor. But Christian's crew managed to escape. However, their life on Pitcairn Island wasn't nearly as heavenly as on Tahiti. The worst event in the history of Pitcairn was the invention of moonshine. Pitcairn Island was inhabited in 1790 by 9 European sailors, including Christian, 6 Lower Castle Tahitians, who were virtually slaves, and 12 Tahitian women. What's interesting is that each of the Europeans got a woman, but the 6 slaves got only 3. As you can see, the seeds of discord were planted long before the colony was founded. Like the Polynesians in the 11th century, The new settlers appreciated Pitcairn Island. There were a lot of fertile lands, fresh water, and a heavenly climate. The main problem turned out to be alcohol. One of the sailors, McCoy, learned how to make moonshine from the sweet roots of the Thai plant growing there. It was a truly diabolical invention that led to genocide. The crew of the Bounty drank violently. Christian stepped back from leadership and got very depressed. McCoy, the owner of the moonshine still, took over governing the island. He turned out to be the worst kind of autocrat, a drunken tyrant and a mediocre leader. Once, he sent one of the women fishing, a beautiful woman named Tebarua, and when she didn't catch enough fish, he bit off her ear in a drunken rage. The woman committed suicide by jumping off a cliff, and McCoy went to his slaves for a new woman, as if nothing had happened. The attempt to take one of the 3 wives from 6 already angry men turned into a massacre. The Tahitian men decided to exterminate the Europeans. They came up with a smart plan. They stole the muskets and other weapons from McCoy and his crew and tracked the sailors down one by one. In just a few hours, they managed to kill most of the Europeans, mainly by decapitating them. The only 4 men left were Adams, Young, Quintal, and ironically, McCoy, who started the whole mess. The terrible massacre on Pitcairn Island eventually resulted in the fact that only 1 man survived. So the year was 1793. Tebarua had committed suicide because McCoy bit off her ear, and the rebels killed 5 of the 9 Bounty sailors. But that was only the beginning. That same night, the Tahitian women killed all the Tahitian men in their sleep. The remaining European men were a bit out of it after these events. Young and Adams started praying fervently and studying the Bible for days on end. Quintal drank himself into oblivion and turned into a maniac who tried to kill the Pitcairn children, and there were many of them already. The remaining men decided that they couldn't allow infanticide to happen, so they beat Quintal to death. After that, McCoy went to a rock by the sea and hanged himself. Yang also died soon, either from shock or because of an asthma attack. Adams was the only man left on the island. He reluctantly took on the role of the patriarch of Pitcairn, although initially he wasn't a very strong-willed man and was relatively young. The history of Pitcairn had more rogue dictators than other empires. Given the story of how it was inhabited, it isn't surprising that all kinds of crooks ruled Pitcairn most of the time. First, there was Christian, who became a drunk, fell into depression, and ignored his duties. Then McCoy, who ruled the island like a true bootlegger. Then was the cartel of 4 men, one of whom hanged himself, while another one got beaten to death. Well, Adams turned out to be a rather controversial man too. There's an opinion that Young didn't die a natural death, but that Adams killed him. And then, having gotten all this new responsibility and having read the Bible, he decided to become a kind of theocratic leader. Adams imagined himself to be Adam, surrounded by Eves, and Pitcairn Island as a paradise that the sinful humans had almost lost. The following decades were spent attempting to create an ideal Christian society. The Pitcairn patriarch read the scriptures to his parish, conducted rituals in his own way, strictly followed morality, broke the moonshine still, and produced a bunch of children. Half of all the people on the island were his direct descendants. In 1808, when British ships sailed to the shores of Pitcairn Island, they found a pastoral religious community, headed by a handsome gray-haired guru. The British liked this picture so much that they started to view Pitcairn Island as an island of virtue and the embodiment of Victorian morality. After Adams's death, the native Pitcairn residents often fell under the influence of various crooks. One day, adventurer George Nobbs sailed there and quickly became the leader of the community. He was a veteran of the war in Chile and a rather charismatic man, although not without quirks. Later, the island fell into the hands of Joshua Hill, who claimed to have been sent by the crown and appointed governor of the island. Hill expelled Knobs and anyone who dared to doubt his regalia, built himself a palace, which actually looked more like a barn, demanded respect, and overall behaved as if he were the king of Britain. Then, the deceit was revealed, and the usurper was expelled in disgrace. This didn't stop Pitcairn Island from immediately falling under the spell of a new adventurer, John Tay, a Seventh-day Adventist, who baptized the population of the island into his faith. Tay lied to the locals that Adventism had already been accepted in England, arguing that the residents of Pitcairn Island needed to be good citizens and join that church. The islanders weren't particularly affected by this, but Tay became the leader of the community for some time and ordered the extermination of all pigs, as was required by his faith. They felt sorry for the pigs, but since Victoria herself had accepted Adventism, nothing could be done. The inhabitants of Pitcairn Island are still followers of this religion, despite the fact that in the 19th and 20th centuries, Pitcairn Island was called the bastion of Victorian morality in the Pacific Ocean. Or maybe because of this, the state has an outrageous percentage of pedophiles. But that's not as hard to achieve, actually. With a population of 50 people, one pedophile is enough to rank first in the world, statistically speaking. However, there were 8 of them. In 2004, 7 Pitcairn residents were convicted of sex with minors, rape, and child abuse. Among them was the mayor of Pitcairn Island, Steve Christian, a descendant of the Fletcher Christian, who started the mutiny on the Bounty. In 2006, they were convicted and put behind bars. For this particular reason, a prison had to be built on the island. In 2010, they were released, but another one was caught immediately thereafter. The new mayor, Mike Warren. He got caught with a 15-year-old girl who was actually a police officer. Now they prefer not to mention these criminal cases. It is a painful subject for the residents of Pitcairn Island. Pitcairn is now the last British colony in the Pacific. This island and several uninhabited islands adjacent to it are the last possessions of Great Britain in the Pacific Ocean. The island is independent de facto, but formally it is still part of the Commonwealth. Britain is responsible for the protection of the island and justice on it. Interestingly enough, when Pitcairn Island officially became a colony in 1838, a democratic electoral system was introduced there for all adult residents. Thus, it became the first territory in Britain in which women received the right to vote. In 1937, 233 people lived there. The population had reached its peak. Currently, there are 49 people living on the island. Almost all young people have immigrated to New Zealand and Australia. 80% of the current budget comes from tourism, so they love visitors on this island. There is no hotel there, so the visitors stay with the locals as their guests. The main thing is not to mention the case of the pedophiles and the massacre of 1793. They don't like to talk about it.